So hi everybody. Please stay with your videos off and stay muted until the second part of the show. There will be time for questions and discussion, but that's later. So welcome to What Makes Our Inner Work Work, Part 6. And I chose to call this part, Don't Talk About the Past, Heal It. Now, if you're watching on Facebook by any chance and you want to ask questions during the second part, then join the Zoom meeting, please. There's a link on my Facebook page. Hopefully it's the right one. So, and okay. So don't talk about the past, heal it. Yesterday, I was looking through old letters and I found a letter, of course an email, from about 20 years ago. And I came across this passage, which I didn't remember writing. And here it is. I am 35, strong, happy, and healthy. 20 years ago, the desperate, hopeless girl I was invented me so that 20 years later, I could go back in time and save her. This letter is from 1999 when I was 35. And this moment really did happen. And this hopeless, desperate girl that I was at 15, I remember her, me, standing with two friends at school. I remember the exact place, the exact time, although memory does play tricks on us. And this 15-year-old Ora was feeling terrible as usual at that time. And suddenly I had this vision. It was very, very brief, of myself aged 35. And in this momentary vision, I saw myself as a mature, happy, complete woman. Very, very, very different from the incomplete, the green, depressed, cynical, unhappy girl, teenage girl that I was then. And then it was gone. And after that, I struggled through depression and self-loathing and, you know, and hopelessness for about 8 more years until I got out of this dark time. But I remembered this moment, this glimpse into the future, into a completely and totally different Ora for over 40 years. And this tiny glimpse of an improbable future was really important, I think. I believe it was one of the things that kept me alive in a way until I could really live and begin at 23 to heal myself and untangle the messy knot that was me. We'll get back to this letter in a few minutes and to disentangling and healing our past. But first, let's take a look at something else. What if we could see ourselves, among other things, as something like healing and completion generators? So something like a generator that tries to unravel something that is tightly twisted and complicated into a beautiful web, perhaps. This is simply another way in which we can see the inner work we seem to constantly invite ourselves to do. We don't always answer this invitation, alas. This twisted, complicated knot is painful and uncomfortable. And it's so whether we realize that consciously, we actually feel the pain, or whether it's buried deeply, deep in our unconscious. Most of our traumas don't go away without us finding ways to actively heal them. So let's think of ourselves as such a twisted, entangled knot. Our lives, our pain, our difficulties. It all often seems really impossible to change, doesn't it? It's so complex, it's so painful, it's so frightening. Where do you begin? And how? And how long will it take? You know, it looks like such a big job. Now, there are many ways to do the work and many people that can help. And it might take years and years and years. And we might find that we need to combine things. That's very, very common, like some body work, some help from a teacher or a therapist or a psychologist, doing courses, studying various methods and techniques and so on and so forth. And as you know, I always say that the main thing through all of that is doing our own work alongside any other thing that we are doing. And just thinking about the vastness of this work can stop us in our tracks. Now, a useful thing to remember, I believe, is that almost any useful step of work of the kind that actually works puts us in a better place. So we may not heal everything, but 50% healing is better than none, I think. And our quality of life and our quality of being has improved. And then we are a bit more experienced, a bit wiser, a bit healthier, and we can take another step forward. So each thread we manage to unravel from the entangled knot makes the rest a bit easier to disentangle. And we have also become just a little better at the job of disentangling our entangled knot. Now, this knot isn't good. It isn't bad, of course. It's just what it is. And yet it's uncomfortable, to say the least, and gives us and others around us a lot of pain and trouble. And 2 years ago, I taught a course called Healing the Past, Creating the Future with Revital Shtayat. And this was an exploration of many practical ways to go back into our past and to heal our past selves. I really explored this thing very, very deeply, figuring out all sorts of ways of doing it. But as you understand from the bit of letter that I read a few moments ago, at the beginning of this meeting, I discovered the importance of this when I was 35. But it took many, many more years before it became this kind of multifaceted method that I could offer both myself and my students. So these past selves, which are us at various times in our past, they are one part of the entangled mess that we are talking about. It's difficult for people to separate from the conventional, psychological, and even what's called rational view of working on the past. Because many people who work on their past either don't heal it at all, it seems, or the healing is very, very minimal. One main reason for this is that they don't consider the past as something that still exists, or to be more accurate, is something that always is, that's always present in a way. And so most people think of the past as something dead and gone, or merely a memory. Now, many people are familiar to some extent with Albert Einstein's theories and his sayings that linear time is on a deep level an illusion. He's quoted as saying, "The distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." And even if some people can accept the fact that it is so, very few think that this has very, very practical implications for our inner work, for our well-being, and for unraveling some aspects of the seemingly impossible knot that we are. So time is not really an arrow that goes from the past through the present and into the future. Everything happens in a way at once. That's why the dark times in our lives, the traumas we remember or have forgotten, they're still alive and they influence us in a million ways. For example, the beliefs we had then still affect us now. The pain, the desires, the hopelessness, the rage. It's somewhat like radio stations in our home, still playing the same tracks over and over again, the same news flashes, the same songs of despair. The past is alive. And since all time always is, and the past is not dead or gone or just a memory, it's still potentially flexible and healable. From healing, healable, I invented this. So we can go back in time, in our consciousness, and heal these historic biographical selves that we were. Okay, so let's go back to the letter I found yesterday that I wrote 20 years ago. I already read the beginning, but for the context, I'll read it again. Okay, I am 35, strong, happy, and healthy. 20 years ago, the desperate, hopeless girl I was invented me so that 20 years later, I could go back in time and save her. The letter continues, and I explain that a good friend from high school visited me and that it brought up a lot. So I'm reading from the letter. Suddenly, she, meaning this high school friend, let me see the depth of her pain and self-hatred and hopelessness, which she carefully hid before. This was how it was for us both when we were 15. It brought about a surge of feeling memory of the desperate, cynical, defensive, lost me of that time. I felt that somehow this girl I was at 15 was trapped in time, where the changes I have gone through since then haven't touched her at all. And that I need to return there and bring her up to date and help her to heal. It was very painful to begin with. The pain was scorching, as if my whole insides were being seared with red-hot iron. And all my listening and love and unattached empathy seemed to do little to help 15-year-old Ora. At one point, I was doing the dishes and talking to her, and I suddenly told her, "You know, you can cry. You don't have to be strong with me or in control." And then the crying began. She was never allowed to cry because it was considered both useless and weak at the time. This did in fact help a lot, and the pain lessened. It is so odd and wonderful. So that's the letter I found yesterday and decided to share with you. So this concept of our past selves locked, trapped in time, as it says in the letter, and the need to return there, and as I wrote, bring her up to date so she knows what has changed in my life, in our life, hers and mine, and help her to heal. And this healing was not a one-time thing. It continued over the years, and each round of healing bore its fruits and empowered me for more steps along the path. So, as we're talking about what makes our inner work work, there are a few things to take from this talk, I think. For example, that it is possible to heal the past, and it changes everything when we do that. It's not enough to talk about the past and understand it and analyze and theorize about it. It's not healing enough. We need to find ways of actually healing it and neutralizing the charges, the explosives, the pain and rage and despair that are there. And do it in a way that honors our past selves and allows them to heal. Another thing I think it would be a good idea to take from this meeting is that it doesn't work to think about things such as the non-linearity of time as just simply interesting theories or even as proven scientific facts. We really need to make practical use of these facts, or at least experiment with them when we are ready for that. And for this to happen, we need to work with our inner doubters, amongst other things. These are inner selves that pour doubt into many aspects of our life. And of course, the idea that we can visit our past and actually change it or heal it usually sounds irrational to most inner doubters. And it makes it very difficult to do the work. So we need to find them, accept them, these inner doubters, but also stop identifying with them. And one of the best ways I am familiar with for doing this is through voice dialogue. There are other ways which we'll discuss in the future, I believe. Another thing I'd be very glad if we take from all this is that healing in general, not only of the past, is really possible. You know, sometimes I'm really surprised to hear people, it can even be psychologists and therapists and so on, that seem to believe that the possibility of changing, transforming, healing is really very limited. They seem to think that you need to accept anxieties, for example, as part of life. And it's true that we need to accept anxieties and depression and all the rest, and any other thing we suffer from. That's really the basis, always, you know, this acceptance of things as they are. It's the only thing that works. And it begins the healing, and it stops us from tearing ourselves to pieces in a way. But accepting ourselves as we are, and the doubters as they are, and the past as it is just part of the way. Another important thing I'd like you to consider is writing and keeping your work diaries and other important texts that have to do with your inner work, dreams, and development. I found it important. I can't explain how important I find it to be. And if I didn't make the effort to keep this letter, for example, it would be less possible for me to understand my path. Needless to say, it would be more difficult to explain it to others too. And so this documentation of my development has been very important for me, and I think it could be the same for most people. Of course, nothing is right for everyone at the same, in the same way, but I do recommend trying it very, very much. And finally, for today, in order to heal, we really need to allow ourselves to experience our pain, the fear, the anger, the despair, anything we're feeling, in a safe and healing way. Just as 35-year-old Ora did at the kitchen sink as she was doing the dishes. If we don't allow ourselves to really experience things, we can't really work with them, and we can't really understand them very deeply. It remains kind of a vague talking about thing, and doesn't really do much inner work that works. Okay, so we'll stop for a moment, and then we'll restart with the second part of this meeting, in which, if you like, we can have a discussion. You can ask questions about this issue or other things, and see you in a moment.